I'm Nicole Johnson, Research Director of CDLRA. Brian is here with me today, and we're going to be talking about challenges facing facing institutions in the fall of 2021. Brian, perhaps you could tell me a bit about yourself and what it is that you do, and your background in higher ed.
Thank you. Good morning, Nicole. Yes, my background is in the college system in Ontario. I worked in the college system for 36 years. I was president of Sir Sandford Fleming College in Peterborough, Ontario, for 16 years. Retired in 2004. Since then, I do executive search, executive consulting. I presently do coaching, executive coaching with CEOs and senior teams in universities, colleges, and healthcare. My own interest, even since my own dissertation, has been on student retention, student success. I came up through the student services side of the house, and then had campus responsibility, academic responsibilities. I've been on the research, online learning, distance learning. Interestingly, I taught all the time I was an administrator, and many of the times I taught in the distance learning side of the house. So when I was asked to join when we founded the Digital Learning Network, it was an interest of mine because it's part of the adaptive learning that I've seen through the decades as we move from paper to other modalities. And so I have keen interest in understanding and promoting online learning and digital learning and adaptive learning.
We've done our national survey this spring for 2021, and it's been an unusual year because this is the first time in which collecting this data at a pan-Canadian level that we've been in a situation where now I'd be surprised if there was an institution that wasn't experienced now in online course delivery as a result of the pandemic. What was really interesting is challenges related to institutional operations. So we've got a number of things listed here, with implementing health protocols being top of the list, with 70% of institutions identifying this as a significant challenge going into the 2021-22 academic year. And things like financial recovery, Canadian student recruitment, coming down quite lower on the list. So tell me what you think about this chart.
Every item here is of interest when you look at it. First of all, implementing healthcare protocols. It isn't just implementing the protocols, it's the decision making in an uncertain time. I've never seen such uncertain time. We would have thought we would have been through this by now, but we aren't. There's a fourth wave coming, perhaps even a fifth wave. Those of us that are historians like to look back, and if you look back on the Spanish flu didn't get over in 1 year or 2 years. It actually extended 4 and 5 years. So what we're seeing is very uncertain times. The decisions that have to be made are large scale. Like last year, we had to implement online learning for everybody. This coming year, there are some institutions that are wanting to return to normal. Many institutions are saying, no, we're going to still stay online. And of course, many are taking the hybrid approach. So absolutely, 70% are saying the protocols, and part of it is that we're not getting this definitiveness from our political leaders. We're in the middle of, especially in Ontario and in Canada, pre-election kind of mentality. So there's a hesitancy to be as decisive as required. It's requiring senior managers now to take definitive action. I found the early decision by David Agnew at Seneca College to say, no, everyone's got to be vaccinated if they're coming on campus, whether they're students or faculty or partners or anything. I think you're going to see more of that because it's required, but it's uncertain. And the order of magnitude of these decisions is pretty substantial. Some have to do with the fiscal survivability of the institutions even, and you see that reflected in the other things here. The second one, technology infrastructure, all got strained last year. It's all strained. And so some people are trying to catch up still, some are trying to shift. There's real interest in this, of course, because that has made a difference, and you see it a little later on, computing availability for faculty and students. We're trying to get our infrastructures up to speed. We're trying to, really make sure that we don't get overstrained. So that's interesting. The student retention is clearly the biggest issue because it drives revenues and it drives overall enrollment. And it's retention of not just our domestic students, but particularly our international students. The next one, and over almost 60% say that retention is a big issue. That's a very large number. International student recruitment. Clearly, we don't know whether they're going to be able to get into the country or not, which countries are going to be approved to come in, which want to come. The good news for Canada is we're doing pretty well relative to the United States in particular, and Great Britain and Australia. Those are the main competitors. We're in the top a handful of international attracting countries, but still it's very uncertain whether students will come in the numbers that they have. We've become very dependent on international students' revenues. Forced restructuring is interesting that half the institutions are talking about this. So there's a fear of what government intervention might be. That's what I read behind that particular piece. Unexpected costs are directly related to the first one, implementing healthcare protocols, because are we going to have to shrink our class sizes, especially our large classes? What I see happening is institutions are saying large classes will be online. And smaller labs, more applied programs are going to be we're going to try everything we can in order to get them in person. But those are related to one another. What's fascinating is how low quality assurance is on this chart. Given the rhetoric that went on for decades about online learning, you would think that this would be top of the mind. Are we really able to deliver the same quality outcomes that we have? And you'll see that a little later on. Even learning outcomes is very low on the concern list. I find that really quite surprising. I think that one will come back in spades a year from now when we actually have the students in the classrooms and we start to identify the learning gaps. Cybersecurity and privacy, well, it's 29%. Like, holy cow, everybody's worried about being hacked. Like it's going on all over in the private sector, public sector, and in our post-secondary institutions, and yet it's only 29%. What I would have thought this would have been up there in the 70% range as well. Financial recovery, again, we know that there's a hit. There is some government support, particularly for students, which is good, but the institutions themselves are going to have to re-gear. But there will be some forgiveness about debt in the short term, I suspect there. Interesting, Canadian student recruitment so low. I would have thought it might have been higher given the worry that students are just going to stay home. But, I was surprised it wasn't higher. So this is a fascinating chart. Clearly, the uncertainty is driving almost everything right now. People are this year will be an interim, trying to get back, but it's going to be an interim year because the pandemic effect, I think, is going to go on for a third and fourth year.
Yeah, I agree with that, especially when we see what's happening with the Delta variant. I think the plans that it would be a full return to in-person with all, restrictions lifted is fast flying out the window. And let's talk a bit about, how this relates to faculty and students. So this chart, will clarify that it is the institutional perspective on challenges related to faculty and students. So these aren't coming from faculty and students themselves. What do you think about what you're seeing here?
Yeah, you make a really good point that this chart might vary substantially if you were asking the student or asking the faculty. However, I do think that the student stress and mental health and faculty stress and mental health at 90 and 74%, they would be similar if we asked the faculty and students. This has been very stressful. And if you ask administrators, they'd be at the 99th percentile, I suspect. Mental health, what is really, my background as a psychologist and counselor tells me, thank God they're finally recognizing this. It's been true for quite a while that mental health has been under-recognized as an issue. The pandemic has brought it forward in spades. And clearly that it's now being seen. The question is, what can we do about it? Because many of our services have had to adapt too, right? The counseling services and health services and these intervention services. Many institutions went away, just had shrank those services. Now we're starting to see a tremendous demand. And the problem is we tended to fall back on our local communities to supplement our institutional services, and they're overwhelmed too. So this is a huge issue and a huge concern to institutions, and can significantly impact performance of students and also retention. I think we're going to have some more adaptive policies and practices in order, and of course, learning strategy supports in order to help our students and our faculty and staff endure. They're already tired. This summer, we got a little bit of a break, but it's going to be another exhausting year for everyone.
Yeah, and then I think before I go on too, that would tie in as well to the previous slide in terms of costs and stuff too, because I'm assuming that to be able to put in accommodations and the student support services and faculty support services, that's going to dramatically impact institutions' budgets as well.
Well, and we haven't seen the layoffs in post-secondary or either, that we saw in the private sector affected by the pandemic. But as the institutions come to grips with their financial circumstances, you're probably going to see some substantial layoffs in the part-time area, particularly, maybe not the full-time area as much as the part-time area. And this, of course, will shrink the availability of resources in order to help the institutions cope. So this is a real huge challenge for institutional leaders. How do we maintain or supplement our learning strategies, our mental health strategies, our services at the same time as we're trying to cope with our financial and fiscal circumstance?
Yeah, and I'm assuming too, the thought of, pending layoffs and precarity, when we see that faculty mental health is right up there at 74%, that sense of uncertainty, I'm sure, impacts faculty mental health as well.
Absolutely, and remember that we're having more and more women in leadership in faculty, and women have taken the burden with at home, particularly with the children at home. So this, I suspect behind that faculty stress and mental health is a huge issue about working from home and having family responsibilities, teaching your children. I think there's a real huge impact here, probably greater on the younger faculty than the older faculty. The older faculty, may not have the family issues that the younger faculty have had. So I think we're going to need some real special kinds of programs to support our faculty and our other staff. Support staff are predominantly female that will have this. I think we're going to have a lot of accommodation issues. Institutions are required by law to accommodate. I think there's going to be huge accommodation challenges that the institutions are going to have. And there's going to be people that don't want to come back to work. one of the organizations I coach, they're trying to bring it back full time, and they're finding many people do not want to come back. They thought they would want to, but it's a diverse group. Your introverts kind of like it. Some people are more comfortable and productive virtually, and some people have huge family challenges in order to think about coming back. So it's not coming back is going to not be as easy as just turning a switch. It's going to be very challenging. And so we're going to have a number of stages of adaptation that will be required. And I suspect some of the good news is that some of these things, those of us in the online learning world have wanted to see more adaptive learning methodologies are going to become more norm rather than less. Clearly there's much more acceptance of online learning. Clearly there's a more hybrid. 5 years ago, we were trying to convince faculty it was a great idea. Now it's going to be almost a requirement in almost every program that they have a technology component. So there's some real opportunities here, not only just threats and fears.
Yeah, and I think that ties in. So tell me about the numbers, that you're seeing on the chart here, particularly with, we've got online assessment practices, faculty attitudes towards online, student attitudes towards online, and, the proportion of institutions that are seeing this as challenges.
Yeah. The 80% online assessment, of course, is really interesting. One of the organizations I coach has been a center for our Ontario for assessment, and of course that the old assessment has totally changed now. They're not sending them to assessment centers to be invigilated. It's got to be virtual, and so and of course there's the security issues that come with that. So there's a whole rethink going on assessment. Personally, I think we were way too dependent on that final exam assessment kinds of things. But the challenge here is not just in the theoretical assessment, it's also in the practical assessment. How do you do virtually practical assessment? But there's some real fascinating developments here, applications, virtual reality kind of assessment and others that I think are quite exciting. I think getting away from that paper and pencil quiz test kind of mentality is going to be helpful, and getting to more real behavioral kinds of things and using new applications. It's going to be an exciting time, actually. The access to technologies is still pretty high here. You see over 50% of the students are saying their administration saying that students' access is still a big issue. While there's been investments and call for investments by the provincial and federal government to get to the rural and remote areas, that's all promises still. It isn't reality yet. And so I think this reflects the reality, which is there's still going to be a challenge in the near term, getting the right technologies, the right access. Just as you and I are sitting here worrying, is this thing going to freeze or stop or whatever? People are finding that they need the better technologies, and institutions, as it goes back to the first chart, earlier chart, the technologies infrastructure has to be improved, and that means the tools available to the students. The good news is that the applications are just terrific. If we didn't have Zoom or Teams or these other tools now, we would be much worse off than we are. Attitudes, interesting that there were it's less than 50% now. That I think this is actually 44%. There's a challenge, but that's significantly less than the 70% I think that we saw in some of our research previously. It was the minority that was promoting online learning. Now we have an acceptance by the majority, which I think is a significant shift that's taken place. Student engagement, there's some really interesting new applications coming out as well on how to engage more. There's much more experience now on how to do it. Those of us that know that just putting things online is insufficient, that it's really the engagement component. I'm glad to see it at 29%. It still is the largest challenge, which is how do we really truly engage and how do we adapt the learning? But there's some new learning application tools coming out that I think are going to be very powerful to address this. I'm really surprised, Nicole, that addressing inequalities is so low. Like, holy cow, like given all the discussion about Aboriginal, access and development, social injustices, with the social groups, the inequalities right now in terms of access. We know that the lower income, lower socioeconomic groups are having much more difficulty. And yes, and yet inequalities is only at 27%. I guess I'm really shocked by that one. And the one I'm shocked the most by is student learning outcomes at only 11%. Holy cow. Like not only our present students will have learning gaps, but those entering our institutions coming out of this experience are going to have huge learning issues. So the two from the quality, lacking concern about quality, lacking concern about learning outcomes kind of go together to me, and I'm surprised they're so low.
Yeah, and I think what you said before, your point before, it'll be interesting in a year's time to see whether there is a significant shift in the priority being placed on that. What are your final thoughts in terms of the big picture, that what stands out to you most? What would you tell institutions to keep front of mind as they're going into this next academic year?
One that isn't in our charts, but we grappled with as researchers this year was getting the numbers.
Yes.
We're the inability to get the right data in order to do the analytics and to do the decision making is a really big concern to me. We approached the institutions. Could we get the enrollment data? Could we get whether they were enrolled in online or hybrid or whatever? The inability to get that data. It was difficult at the beginning, and it's still, we were progressing on it. But this year, of course, we decided not to because the institution said that they weren't able to do that. That's a really, how do you make decisions if you don't have the data to be able to make the decisions? And so it's not on our three charts, but it's behind our ability to do the research this year. The second thing, and you've heard me, is the learning and quality. I think, and it goes with the assessment. We're going to have to do assessment differently. We're going to have to identify those learning gaps. Many of our professional programs and our college programs have learning outcomes very specifically defined. Many of our professional practices have them very specifically defined. If you want to be a doctor, you got examinations, or a nurse, you got examinations, or accountants. All of that assessment is being rethought, and we'll identify, I suspect, very significant differences between the graduates of today or the students of today or the applicants of today. And so we're going to have a whole need to identify those gaps, develop strategies in order to fill those gaps. Because I don't expect, I actually think the workplace has also changed dramatically, and some of the other stuff I've been looking at. Workforce demands now in technology skills and other skills are going up. They're not going down, they're going up. And so we're going to see significant learning gaps, and the attention of the institutions to quality and learning gaps will be a substantial factor. I also think we're not going back. The digital learning, hybrid learning, technology, the sage on this, anybody that thinks they're going to go back to face and sage on the stage, it's not going to happen. The students now know that they can get access to content very readily, very quickly. And in fact, they're double checking the professors now. I taught a doctoral class last summer, and some of those students were way ahead of me on accessing some of the content. It's really going to be a real focus now on how do we make sure we get that critical thinking? How do we make sure we get that problem solving? And how do we engage the students so that we're used to bonding students, especially in the first semester of their university or college experience. It hasn't happened. How are we going to bond students? How are we going to engage them when they haven't even been on our campuses until the end of their sophomore year? What kind of experience, are they going to have? What kind of group processes and problem solving will they have? So there's some really big challenges ahead of us that's foretold in our data that we've got here in our research this year.
Yeah. Well, and I think, it ties it up really nicely that I think what you say, it's an interesting year and it's going to be pushing institutions to continue to innovate and find these new ways of doing things, especially if a full return to campus isn't possible, but also recognizing that even if it is, as you said, as students and faculty are demanding different now. They've experienced different and they want to go forward in new ways. And I think these are exciting times filled with a lot of opportunity going forward.
I think we're going to also see, as we've seen in other workplaces, I think there's going to be a whole lot of retirements. People that, faculty and staff that just simply say, I've experienced something else and I want to get on with the rest of my life. So that will open up other opportunities. I also think some of the technology champions will now, their value will be seen, and they will be, I don't think any leader can lead a post-secondary institution now without a real major commitment to a diversity of learning styles. So there'll be new champions. I see positions being posted now, innovation, vice president of innovation, in institutions. So yeah, it's shifting, as you've said, and some of that's exciting. It really is, that we will have made a leap forward. In the private sector, they're talking about having, I remember D2L, the president of D2L, saying that he did his 20-year plan was done in 2 years, like what they were going to do out to the future. And I think that's true in our post-secondary institutions. What we were planning to evolve toward, we've had to move dramatically to. And so what's the next frontier? That's the real big question too.
Lots of exciting things. Well, thank you, Brian. This has been a wonderful conversation and I appreciate your insights on this.
Thank you, Nicole. I appreciate the opportunity to reflect.